Okay, hello, peace everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to you guys at Bannister Gallery, and thank you, Frank, for helping put this together. It's been many years in the making.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And of course, thank you, Christiane, for helping us put this show together. And big thanks to Will, because you've been an amazing partner and friend for all these years, helping me put this wild, dumb VR things together. So thank you so much. DiMoDA, the Digital Museum of Digital Art, is a virtual reality museum that is dedicated to producing, championing, and exhibiting cutting-edge artworks in virtual reality. This is our 4th exhibition so far, and we are really excited to share with you guys. So I'll hand this over to Christiane so she can tell you a little bit about what this particular DiMoDA is about.
Okay, thanks so much. And once again, big thanks to Victoria, to Frank, to all of you for coming here tonight. So I've been following DiMoDA as a curator for quite a few years, and once again, I believe it's a fairly unique model to have a virtual art museum that does not exist in real life. And for every version of DiMoDA, there is a different architecture and a different scene in which you then encounter artworks through portals in the worlds. And typically 4 works. In this case, it's 3, and Will and Alfredo then invite curators to put together shows within these environments. And we have been working on this for a long time, and while this location seems so connected to our experience over the past few years, it was actually pre-pandemic that we chose this theme, and I think at the time for me it was a little bit more informed about what was going on in the world in terms of increasing economic inequality, the housing market in New York, for example, then the climate crisis, and also anti-racism. All of those were basically socio-political and cultural ideas that really inspired this work. And then the pandemic hit, and of course the idea of dislocation, of displacement, took on a completely different meaning, and I think ironically and perversely maybe also enhanced what we're seeing here today. So we had come up with this idea of the abandoned Brooklyn townhouse landscape before the pandemic, and not when the streets actually became deserted. And then the work continued, and DiMoDA 4.0 premiered at the Virtual Reality Fest in Rome last year. It's been at Gazzelli Art House in London, so this is the 3rd stop, and it will travel on. So there are 3 pieces that also come from very different angles. One piece, Desplazados, by Ricardo Miranda Zúñiga, who works a lot in the area of social activism, focuses on what has been happening on New York's Lower East Side, specifically the Essex Project on the Lower East Side, which was this massive kind of gentrification complex also. That was highly contested, and what Ricardo did was conduct interviews with inhabitants of the Lower East Side. So you are actually wandering through those alleyways, and as you walk through, you come across audio interviews with people, and you see the whole landscape being transformed, like there are high-rises shooting up in the background, and various scenes you encounter in that world. So that one was very local and very specific specific, dealing with real estate and what has been happening in the New York housing market. And then another piece by Tamiko Thiel really zooms out to the planetary level and takes you on a journey basically through the creation of this planet, you know, from the Big Bang and the cosmic egg until today. Tamiko is really one of the pioneers of VR. She started working with George Lucas early on and created worlds with him, and has won several awards for her groundbreaking work, and a lot of it also deals with climate change. Yeah? So when you are in that world, you have this interplay of textual elements, you know, light coming about, you know, you will be surrounded by a swirl of texts, and then experience the evolution of the planet until the recent times, oil rigs, and the kind of decay that comes with it. You know, you have to experience it to really get it. And then the third piece by Banz and Bowinkel, who are based in Berlin, and are really exploring virtual worlds and architectures from different angles. The last one is very much about human-computer interaction. So they kind of transport you into the interior of a computer and its control system. But that control system is embodied by these oily avatars wearing masks that are compiled from images on the internet. And there are in this zombie-like mode in the beginning, but through your interaction, they will actually start following the commands they receive from the system. So that piece, in a more metaphorical and on a more abstract level, really reflects on what we're ultimately encountering every day in our interactions with machines on all kinds of levels, which brings about its own form of dislocation. What
we call the lobby internally, right, which is like the loading scene where you go to see these different artworks. Of course, it's also inspired by this theme of dislocation. As Christiane said earlier, we thought about this kind of idea of a post-human Brooklyn, where it would be taken over by nature, but also embedding this architecture within that space. The architect that we collaborated with, his name is Ayman Tawfiq. He's originally from Baghdad in Iraq, and he came to the US as an immigrant. And myself also as an immigrant, we collaborated and we thought about, you know, this concept of being dislocated from the place that, you know, we're originally from, and we created the architecture based on these parameters. So what you see in the architecture that houses all these other dislocation mirrors, so to speak, is in fact created by adding together the 3D scans of many different immigrants from different parts of the world, from the Middle East, from South and Central America, from Africa, and from Southeast Asia. And this combination creates this structural building. So that's what you can see here in the background, and also there's a 3D print of it in the back room that you can also take a look at. And then we call this building the Nomad, and we also kind of created this wrap around the building as a way to signify this protective layer that people will put around their heads when they cross deserts. Both, you can observe this with folks who are migrating from Central America and they have to cross the Arizona desert, but you can also see that within Middle Eastern culture, just as a survival mechanism that has been integrated into just everyday life. So we wanted to also kind of allure to these things all together. So that all kind of ties all the works of DiMoDA. So as you can see, Alex is now in the lobby. So what we call the lobby, really, which is this, you know, post-human Brooklyn.
Yeah, the more technical term of the lobby scene, but in this case, it's rewilded. Yeah.
So yeah, do you want to just look around there with your body a little bit, Alex? Just kind of show us around. And this was a surprisingly difficult scene to put together. I mean, Will, do you want to talk about all the problems that it had and how you fixed it?
Well, I think like one of the challenges in building spaces like this is always we're working with lots of different artists and you know, Alfredo included, who have different methods of producing works in 3D environments. And one of the challenges in working in virtual reality is just the issue of performance and ensuring that when you are in a headset that you're not having any issues with like lag or dropping frame rates. A lot of artists work in like static 3D, for example, where you can spend hours or days rendering a scene, where in these real-time experiences, we're rendering this entire environment 90 times per second. Or in these headsets, it's probably 72. But still, it's a lot of processing to do very quickly. So we have to optimize all of the scenes and reduce like polygon counts, ensure that textures are able to load quickly, and that we're not taxing the machines that are on these walls too heavily, so that we can achieve those high frame rates. So that involves a lot of collaboration between Alfredo and myself, other artists that we bring in to consult and help optimize our scenes, as well as when we collaborate with all the other artists and help them achieve that same level of performance in all of their scenes.
Will also constructed these computers specifically to be able to run these kind of simulations. So with VR, you need a lot of processing power. So it's hard to just do it with computers that come off the shelf. So these, you know, we wanted to build these computers that were both like really powerful, but also aesthetically beautiful and could match the aesthetics of the whole exhibition. So as you can see, Alex is now navigating into the museum. I guess he's gonna go to the lower level.
New York subway station.
Yeah, it's actually a little bit cleaner than the ones in real life.
So once again, this is Ricardo Miranda, and there's the rat, you know, Ricardo Miranda Zúñiga's rendition of the Essex Street complex in its more original form. And once again, you're not going to hear the interviews that you will encounter as you're walking through this environment. So you're also kind of guided by what you're hearing, the sounds you are hearing. So on this screen in the back, you now have someone working for a development firm, giving you an alluring impression of what this all could be and the glamour of it all. And then maybe in a second you will also see high-rises shooting up in the background. What Ricardo did here was really create this not absolutely one-to-one rendition of what these streets, alleyways look like, but also going into the past and getting kind of the character of the neighborhood and what it once was like.
Like the original tenement buildings.
Right?
Yeah, and also these interviews are kind of disembodied. So you don't see anybody walking in the streets, you just hear their voices, which I think is kind of a really interesting experience to see, right? Or to have, as you expect folks to be hanging out in the streets, but all you hear is their stories about what they have experienced and how they have, you know, been living in the Lower East Side for such a long time, and then how they have seen a shift and change.
And it's a nice interplay between the architecture and the stories. I think the fact that those are disembodied voices also highlights the environment itself and the changes in it.
So there's the challenge of creating something that feels natural in a virtual environment while also hinting at or referencing normal user interactions that we're familiar with on an everyday basis. So having like a text menu where you can select things in a floating field in front of you where you're kind of pointing the laser beams at it might not be the most natural way to explore. but it introduces some of those familiar paradigms of user interface that helps us get to evolving user interactions so that we can continue to advance what UI and UX looks like in virtual reality in the future.
Okay, so now Alex has entered the piece called, it's The Grid, right?
The Grid.
The Grid by Banz Bowinkel, and you can see a little bit of what Christiane was talking about earlier, these like zombie figures.
So once again, this is a more abstract rendition of computer interactions. So you're transported into the interior of the machine. There are these cross-like transmitters that are above you, and it's also very notable that these avatars are kind of ignoring you and doing their own thing. And without getting too deeply into the interactions, you see at sometimes these rays or circles descending or ascending, which is when they're getting their commands from the machinic system. You are ultimately the one who is originally activating them. So the whole environment captures this interplay of our interaction with machines and them following their own rule-based systems. And one of the allures of this is that the piece asks you to explore and figure out how you fit in with this, what influence you have, and also making the machinic operations a little bit more graspable. The grid is part of a larger piece that has 7 levels of interactions. So in this shorter version of it, there are ultimately only 3 of them.
Yeah, and like Christiane was saying, it's interesting how the piece kind of begs you to figure out how to interact with it without any particular instructions. And I don't know if you guys noticed, there was like a flash of light just now, and that indicates that Alex has just gone up 1 level. So now the interaction of these avatars is going to be slightly different. So it is a little bit challenging, right? Because as artists, when we first started this project, we came at it completely as artists, Will and myself. And as we have grown over the years, so we started this back in originally 2013, right? And we launched in 2015. But during all these years, we have had to like sharpen our technical skills, right? So it's been kind of like a amazing thing that we're really developing high-end virtual reality at the same time that we're trying to make art. So it's kind of a weird balance, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, I think, how like Alfredo and I have divided our roles in a way that I think really lends well towards the collaboration. Like Alfredo's really taken on a lot of like the curatorial and creative elements of shaping like what DiMoDA is conceptually, along with the collaboration with curators such as Christiane, where I, as co-founder, have taken on a lot more of the technical side on tooling and developing the process for how we can work with artists internationally, remotely. Before pre-pandemic, we had this issue of like how do we collaborate remotely with very, very large repositories. So like our code base is for this project is something around 32 gigs. Which working in 2015 that's a lot of data to be moving around. So, and I think that also mirrors kind of how we've developed like outside of DiMoDA as well. Like Alfredo has a really great art practice independently outside of DiMoDA, and I've taken my career on more of a technical side as well. It's been really, I think, really great to be able to collaborate and fulfill, I think, the opposite sides of like where we're following in our own paths as well. So like Alfredo brings a lot more art and creativity into my life, and I don't know if you feel fulfilled by like the technical side of that I bring, but
for sure. I mean, it's amazing because you like fulfill my nerdy side, so we can both like kind of like have this beautiful collaboration. And of course, this wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for this kind of like left brain, right brain collaboration, right? So without each other, this wouldn't be possible. Because it is quite a technical challenge to make sure that all this works, right? Like, so for example, like I mentioned, the lobby scene was very difficult to deal with because I built it as an artist and I just threw things together and it was beautiful looking, but it was just way too intense for the computer. So then it's Will's job to go in there and figure out what is the best way that we can optimize this so actually people can enjoy it, right? So.
I think there's another aspect of the technical side of things, and I'll hand it over to Christiane to talk about the piece in just a second, but I think I do want to emphasize that as a digital gallery and museum, preservation is one of our core tenets, and having the technical capabilities to go in, optimize all of the media, but also maintain it and create archives that can be updated, and keeping all of the pieces alive and able to be seen in new VR headsets as they come out, and making sure that everything is keeping up to date with, when we update like our UI, and we're making better decisions about how people can interact with things that aren't the art themselves, like the menu systems, that we spread that across all of the previous versions as well, so that they are forever, they kind of live forever. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
Just that sometimes I miss just being a sculptor and a painter, you know? Yeah. But this is also really exciting for me. So
right now we're in Tamiko Thiel's Atmosphäre, and I described this piece a little bit. So in the beginning you were in the void, and you literally had the words void spelled out around you, and then you're going through the cosmic egg, Big Bang. And now we are proceeding through the evolution of the Earth in a textual and experiential way. And we will, as Alex moves on here and through the environment, then witness the increased heating of the planet and also exploitation of the planet. So now we're looking at the oil rigs and the drilling, and as I mentioned, increased heating of the planet. Tamiko works in virtual reality and augmented reality. She also did a climate-related augmented reality piece for the Whitney Museum. And I think what makes this particular piece unique is also its interplay between the textual and the visual, and how she plays with semiotics and science in that evolution of the planet.
Yeah, and I also think one of the things we wanted to break out of from the very beginning, so back when we started this project, we were both in college and we were in Chicago, at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And at the time, Will was running a small gallery called Triangle, which was actually quite an amazing space that would bring in like all kinds of like noise musicians and crazy video artists, and a lot of like live AV kind of like experiences. So Will already had this kind of like side of the gallery world in a way, but also in a very experimental way. And then when we started DiMoDA and we really wanted to kind of like dive into this world of digital art, a lot of people were not quite, the way that they presented digital art was difficult, right? Because most of it existed on the internet. So the way to experience digital artwork was by logging onto a website and seeing some GIFs online, and that was kind of it. And that was also kind of like the digital gallery scene, so to speak. So we really wanted to think of a way that we could have an exhibition at a gallery space that wouldn't just be like a monitor on a desk with a mouse and a keyboard that you could just run around it. So we definitely like played around a lot with that idea, and I think, like you said, the first exhibition that we had at Transfer Gallery was like our first way of combining that skill set of like Will's experience being in a gallery and with all his AV experience, and kind of like blending it all together, and then having this secondary layer, or I don't know if it's secondary or primary layer, of the VR being like what we're showing, but also having this additional layer of, like Will said, immersion, So that was fun, and we've done a bunch of them in different places, and they're all unique in their own way, and they all presented their own challenges, so it's been really fun.
So what is once again really notable about this structure is that you're ultimately also really creating an alternative museum model. So this is not only about developing a virtual world, but from a museum and gallery perspective, there is a lot of thinking through running this virtual museum, which has real world impact. So you guys have to do contracts with the artists about the artwork that you're bringing into your museum, like a traditional museum gallery would do loan forms. You have to invent a completely different system for that. Also within that, the question arises, well, yeah, there are individual artworks in here owned by the artists. When it comes to gallery sales, how do we package this? And DiMoDA can be sold as a package, but that and goes on tour for a year, and then artists still, of course, have rights to their own work, which is not tied to this structure. So there are a lot of real-world logistic issues that are embedded in running a virtual museum.
And also one thing that we've experimented with is like, how does this gallery exist? Like, again, like as we enter this world of art, there's certain things about it that we have to engage in. So for example, like selling artworks, and selling a digital artwork has its own challenges. Selling a VR artwork has a whole additional set of challenges. But then we've also created these like physical objects, right? So the sculpture that you see in the back, oftentimes we create it with an embedded USB drive in it. So when somebody buys this physical object that is like a derivative of the digital world that we created, they also can extract the exhibition from it. So we always, for me, I've always kind of liked this idea of like the way that Christiane said, I thought was really nice, like creating like a porous barrier between these realities.
Another thing to add, I think, that is really core to our distribution model is like a lot of digital artists are concerned with ideas about scarcity and how do you ensure that like this copy of the digital artwork is the artwork, and a lot of ideas have come up around like how do you leverage blockchain, or like NFTs are huge now, and a lot of debate about like, well, if you own the NFT, like what does that really mean? We've tried to avoid all of that, and we distribute all the exhibitions after their tours freely online. There's no copyright protection that we put on anything. One is it's a technical challenge, like we don't want to have to deal with that, but also it's, as digital work is inherently copyable. Like that's what digital media was created for. It's being able to be easily copied, and we want people to be able to experience all of the exhibitions as much as possible, which is kind of why we've opened that up, and we don't drive the revenue for artists and the museum by withholding access, but more on focusing on like individual sales of individual pieces, or the collector's items are a way for us to avoid relying upon forced scarcity as a economical model for driving the museum.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.